I was 34 when my mother drove nearly 3 hours to sell the ranch I had rebuilt, from mud, debt, and broken fences. She brought my father, my golden child sister, and a realtor with a valuation folder, all convinced I was just the granddaughter who had helped around the place. What they did not know was that my grandfather had signed the deed over to me 3 years earlier, recorded it with the county, and left every legal receipt in my name. But before my mother stood on my porch and tried to sell my life for cash, she had already taught me how easy it was for my family to erase me. It started 10 years earlier, on my 25th birthday, when they cancelled my dinner for my sister's fake emergency. Chapter 1. The birthday they cancelled. I was 34 years old the morning. My mother drove almost 3 hours to sell a ranch she did not own. By then, Whitaker Hill Ranch had 188 working acres tucked into the foothills east of Lexington, not far from the Red River Gorge. 37 horses lived on that land. 18 boarding stalls stayed full. A 32-acre rescue pasture sat behind the south fence, and 16 names waited on a list I kept clipped to the office wall. People who came through the gate saw fresh paint on the barn, clean water troughs, a covered arena, and horses that lifted their heads when they heard my truck. They assumed I had inherited something beautiful. They were wrong. I had inherited blisters, mud, debt, sleepless nights, and an old man who believed land could tell the difference between someone who wanted it and someone who stayed. But before there was a deed, before there was an attorney, before my mother stood on my porch and tried to announce what she planned to do with my life, there was one Saturday night in July of 2015, my 25th birthday. Back then, I lived in Lexington, Kentucky, in a one-bedroom apartment over a dry cleaner that always smelled faintly of steam and starch. I worked at Bluegrass Feed and Supply, loading grain bags, ringing up fly spray, recommending hoof supplements to women who knew their horses' bloodlines better than their own family trees. I was saving for the vet tech certification program at Fayette Community College. I had $4,200 in a white envelope, tucked inside an old shoebox in my closet. Every bill counted twice. Every dollar, already promised to a future I was trying to build with my own hands. I did not want much from my family. That was what made the hurt so humiliating. I was not asking them to pay my tuition. I was not asking them to rescue me. I just wanted them to show up. My mother, Celeste Vale, had built her entire personality around being needed. She was polished, church-going, always the first to sign up for charity committees, and the last to admit when she was wrong. She had a way of making control sound like concern. "Family comes first," she would say, usually right before asking me to come last. My father, Graham, was quieter. He worked in insurance, kept his shirts pressed, and believed silence was the same thing as peace. If my mother pushed too hard, he looked at the floor. If my sister cried, he handed her tissues. If I stood there waiting for him to notice me, he cleared his throat and changed the subject. Then there was Briar. Briar was 23 that summer, soft-voiced when it helped, helpless when it worked, and always somehow in the middle of an emergency. Anxiety before a dinner reservation. A panic attack before someone else's good news. A breakup right before a holiday. A bad roommate the week rent was due. A job she left after 6 days because the manager had a tone. My mother called her sensitive. I called her protected. When I was sick, Mom told me I knew where the medicine was. When Briar felt lightheaded before a hair appointment, Mom cancelled her afternoon. When I needed money for books, Mom said I was resourceful. When Briar needed a deposit for another apartment because her roommate was toxic, Mom said we all had to pull together. "Briar does not bounce back the way you do," Mom would tell me. For years, I thought that meant she believed in me. I did not understand yet that in my family, being strong was just another way to be left alone. 2 years before that birthday, I graduated with my associate degree in animal science. It was not a fancy degree, not the kind people brag about at country clubs, but it mattered to me. I had worked mornings, nights, weekends, whatever Bluegrass Feed would give me. I had studied after closing shifts with hay dust in my hair and cracked skin around my knuckles. I remember standing behind the curtain at the ceremony, searching the rows for my parents. I saw an empty stretch of seats where they were supposed to be. 15 minutes before my name was called, Briar had a panic episode in the parking lot. By the time my mother came back inside, my tassel had already been moved. Dad missed it too. Later, in the family group chat, Mom posted a photo of Briar wrapped in a blanket in the passenger seat with a caption about scary moments and grateful hearts. My graduation photo came after that. It got 2 thumbs up emojis and 1 message from Dad that said, "Nice job." I told myself it was fine. That was what I did. I folded disappointment small enough to swallow. By July of 2015, I had decided I wanted one night that could not be folded. I booked a private room at a steakhouse in Lexington, 5 weeks ahead of time. 10 seats, 7 o'clock on a Saturday. A $150 deposit that made my stomach tighten when I handed over my debit card. I did not ask anyone to plan it. I did not ask for gifts. I only asked my parents, Briar, and a few relatives to come sit at a table, because I was turning 25, and I wanted, for once, to be the reason people showed up. I told Mom and Dad in person, because I knew better than to trust a text. We were standing in their kitchen, the one with the white cabinets. Mom wiped down every night like fingerprints were a moral failure. Dad was reading mail at the counter. Mom was trimming the stems of grocery store roses. "I have the room booked," I said. "Saturday at 7. Just dinner. Nothing big." Dad looked up and smiled in that distracted way of his. "Sounds nice, honey." Mom nodded without really looking at me. "That should be fine," I asked her, carefully. If anything was happening with Briar that night, Mom's scissors stopped. "Don't start expecting the worst from your sister." I remember the way my chest tightened. I had not accused Briar of anything. I had only asked if my birthday had a chance. 2 days before the dinner, Briar texted the family group chat. She said she felt off. She said her chest was tight. She said she did not know why, but something felt wrong. Mom replied in less than a minute, "Call me now, sweetheart." I stared at my phone for a long time. My last message to that same group had been about my birthday reservation, and Mom had replied 5 hours later with a heart emoji. The next day, the emergency changed shape. Maren Vale, Briar's boyfriend, had proposed. Not dramatically, not at a restaurant, not in front of anyone. He asked her in his apartment after work. And somehow that became a crisis. Briar was overwhelmed. Briar could not process. Briar needed family around her to feel grounded. Mom said an engagement dinner would help. The time they chose was Saturday at 7. My Saturday, my room. My one night. I called Briar from the parking lot behind Bluegrass Feed, still wearing my name tag, my hands smelling like molasses grain. She answered on the 4th ring, breathy and small. "Maren, I cannot handle a fight right now." "I am not fighting," I said. "I already booked dinner for Saturday." There was a pause. "I know, but I did not know it mattered this much." My jaw went tight. "It is my 25th birthday." "I know," she said, and somehow managed to sound wounded by that fact. "Can we not just combine them? It would be weird to make people choose." People, I thought. Not Mom, not Dad, not family. People. I told her I needed to call Mom. Mom answered like she had been waiting. Before I could finish a sentence, she said Briar was fragile. Aaron had made things complicated, and this was not the time for me to be rigid. I asked her, "What about me?" Mom sighed, not angry, just tired of me. "You always land on your feet." By noon on Saturday, she called to make it official. They were going to Briar's engagement dinner. My birthday could happen another time. Another time was my mother's favorite promise. It sounded kind, and it never had a date. I stood in my apartment with my dress, hanging on the closet door, the price tag still tucked under the sleeve because I had not decided if I could afford to keep it. My phone was pressed so hard to my ear it hurt. "Why is it always me, Mom?" For once, she did not dodge the question, "Because you are the strong one, Maren. Briar needs us." There it was. The sentence that finally made everything clear. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not beg her to remember that I was her daughter too. I just said, okay. But that okay did not mean I agreed. It did not mean I understood. It did not mean I would make it easier for them anymore. It meant I was done. I called the steakhouse and cancelled the room. The deposit was non-refundable. The hostess sounded sorry in that professional way. Strangers can be kinder than family. After I hung up, I stood in the middle of my apartment and looked at the white envelope in the shoebox, the one with my vet tech money inside. I took part of the cash. Not all of it. Enough. Then I packed a duffel bag. 2 pairs of jeans, a sweatshirt, work boots, my social security card, my birth certificate, a faded denim jacket. I did not pack the dress. Before I left, my phone buzzed. The family group chat was full of pictures from Briar's engagement dinner. Briar smiling with her hand tilted toward the camera. Mom pressed against her shoulder, glowing like the night had gone exactly the way it was meant to. Dad in the background, smiling softly, relieved that no one was upset enough to make him choose. Then Mom sent a message, so grateful our family showed up for her tonight. I stared at that sentence until the screen blurred. Then I turned off notifications. I did not leave the group, not yet. I wanted proof, even if it was only for myself, that I had not imagined being erased. I drove east as the sun dropped behind Lexington. The city lights thinned. The road narrowed. Horse farms gave way to darker hills. Gas stations with hand-painted signs. Long stretches where my headlights were the only thing cutting through the trees. I stopped once at a gas station outside Winchester, parked under a flickering light, and called the only person I could think of. My grandfather answered on the second ring. Silas Whitaker had never been a man who wasted words. He was my mother's father, though you would not know it by the way she talked about him. Mom had spent most of my life pretending she came from somewhere cleaner, quieter, more respectable than a working ranch in eastern Kentucky. "Grandpa," I said, and my voice almost broke, "can I come stay for a while?" He did not ask what happened. He did not ask what I had done. He did not tell me to calm down or call my mother back. He only said, "Door is unlocked. There is stew on the stove." I drove the rest of the way with one hand on the wheel and the other pressed against my stomach, like I was holding myself together. Near midnight, I turned onto the gravel road leading to Whitaker Hill Ranch. The dark opened around me. Fence posts leaned in uneven lines. The barn was only a shape against the sky. Then I saw it. A porch light, warm and steady, burning at the end of the road for the first time that night. Someone had left a light on for me, without being asked. Chapter 2. The wrench that didn't ask me to be strong. The gravel popped under my tires as I rolled past the crooked front gate. And the first thing I noticed was that Whitaker Hill did not look like salvation. It looked tired. The fence along the drive leaned in 3 different directions. The barn roof sagged near the east corner, dark where old rain had soaked through. A water trough near the paddock dripped steadily into a muddy ring. The gate dragged against the ground when I pushed it open, groaning like it had been waiting years for someone to fix it. I sat in my car for a few seconds, with both hands on the steering wheel, suddenly aware that I had not run toward a soft place. I had run toward work. Silas was on the porch when I stepped out. He wore an old flannel shirt, jeans faded white at the knees, and boots that looked older than most of my memories. A thermos sat beside him, along with 2 enamel mugs. He did not rush down the steps. He did not throw his arms around me and ask for every detail before I was ready to speak. He just looked at my duffel bag, then at my face, and said, "Rough birthday." That was all it took. I had made it through the phone call with Mom. I had made it through the cancelled reservation. I had made it through Briar's engagement photos and the drive out of Lexington, but those 2 words from my grandfather loosened something in my chest. I stood at the bottom of his porch steps, still wearing the dress shoes I had planned to wear to my own dinner. And I told him everything. I told him about the steakhouse, the 10 seats, the deposit I would never get back. I told him about Briar saying we should combine celebrations. Like my birthday was a side dish she could move around on a plate. I told him about Mom saying I was the strong one. I told him about Dad standing behind her silence the way he always did. Silas listened until I ran out of words. He poured coffee into one of the mugs and pushed it toward me. The coffee was bad, bitter and too strong, but it was hot. Your mother, he said, learned how to love what looked helpless. She never learned how to love what kept standing. I wanted him to tell me she was wrong. I wanted him to say I deserved better. Instead, he said something that stayed with me longer. You can sleep in the back room tonight. In the morning, we will see what kind of person you are when nobody is asking you to disappear. I did not know what he meant until the sun came up. Whitaker Hill looked worse in daylight. The place covered 84 acres Silas could still hold on to, though he no longer had the body to work all of it. 7 old horses stood in the near pasture, their coats dull, but their eyes bright. The barn roof needed patching before the next hard rain. The south pasture fence had 3 busted posts and a section of wire drooping into weeds. Half the equipment in the shed looked like it had retired before I was born. Silas walked me around slowly, not because the tour was sentimental, but because his knees hurt. He pointed with his coffee mug instead of his hand. I have land and no back left, he said. You have a back and nowhere to put it. That was his offer. Not comfort, not pity. Work. Before I could answer, he handed me a pair of old leather gloves. They were cracked at the thumb and patched across the palm, the kind of gloves that had been repaired, because nobody in that family threw out something just because it got tired. They were too big for me. When I slid my hands into them, the fingertips folded over. Silas watched me flex my fingers. They will fit when you stop trying to prove you do not need anyone. I almost gave them back. Instead, I put them in my coat pocket and followed him to the fence line. The first week, I worked like pain could be outrun. I carried feed bags that were too heavy, hauled buckets until my shoulders shook, and tried to fix fence boards without knowing which nails to use. I learned quickly that wanting to be useful and knowing how to be useful were not the same thing. I hammered my thumb twice. I ripped a blister open under the old gloves. I fell asleep one night in my work boots with hay in my hair and mud dried on my jeans. I did not ask for help, because asking felt like proving my mother right. If I needed someone, maybe I was not strong. If I struggled, maybe Briar had been the fragile one all along, and I had only been pretending. 3 days into the south pasture repair, Ray Calder rolled up in a battered blue truck. He lived on the next property over, ran a small cattle operation, and had the kind of face that looked permanently sunburned. He leaned out the window and said he could bring his tractor over and set the posts in half a morning. I said no before he finished the sentence. Ray looked past me at the crooked line of holes I had been digging by hand. Then he looked back at me. Suit yourself, he said. But pride makes a poor post driver. I dug until sunset. By then my shirt was soaked, my palms were raw, and only 2 holes were deep enough to matter. Silas stood near the fence with one hand resting on a post. That is not strength, he said. That is your mother's voice wearing work boots. I hated him a little for being right. The next morning, I called Ray. He arrived after breakfast with the tractor, and his wife Lena came behind him with sandwiches, wrapped in wax paper and lemonade in a glass jar. The job I had nearly bled myself empty over was finished before lunch. Ray did not make me feel stupid. Lena did not fuss over my hands like I was a child. They just worked beside me, and when it was done, Ray slapped dust off his jeans and said, "See, girl, the fence does not care who gets credit. It just needs to stand." That was the first lesson Whitaker Hill taught me. A few weeks later, Dr. Owen Mercer drove up in a white veterinary truck to check one of Silas's old geldings, a grey with a bad knee and a habit of pinning his ears at strangers. Owen was 39, though he had the tired calm of someone who had been called out in storms at 3 in the morning too many times to be impressed by drama. He did not walk straight at the horse. He stood by the stall door, lowered his voice, and waited. The gelding watched him for almost a full minute before stepping closer. Owen smiled slightly and said, "There you are. I noticed that. I noticed the patience. I noticed that he did not demand trust just because he had good intentions. Not long after, the barn roof became more than an eyesore. Rain pushed through the weak corner during a summer storm and soaked 3 stacks of hay before we could move them. I sat at the kitchen table that night with Silas's old calculator, adding feed costs, farrier bills, vet visits, lumber, nails, fuel, and the money left in my envelope from Lexington. The numbers did not care about my feelings. If we did not find boarding clients soon, the ranch would not survive on stubbornness. Then Juniper came. She arrived in a borrowed trailer from a property outside Stanton, a bay mare so thin, her hip bones looked sharp enough to cut through her coat. She was about 9, Owen guessed, though neglect had aged her. Her eyes were flat and guarded. She flinched when a hand lifted too fast. Someone had left her in a foreclosed lot with bad hay, dirty water, and no one checking whether she was still standing. Owen examined her carefully and told us recovery was possible, but dangerous. Small feedings, strict timing, no overcorrecting, no trying to make up for months of hunger in one night. Kindness can kill her if you rush it, he said. I looked at Silas. We did not have extra money. We had a leaking roof, old horses, broken equipment, and no guarantee the next month would work. We cannot afford her, I said. Silas looked at the mare, then at me. We cannot afford to be the kind of people who leave her there. So she stayed. I named her Juniper because Silas said juniper trees grew where better-looking things gave up. For the first few days, I sat outside her stall after chores, not touching her, not asking anything from her. I just sat there with my back against the wall, while she watched me from the far corner. If I moved too quickly, she jerked her head up. If I raised my hand, her whole body tightened. I knew that kind of flinch. Mine lived deeper, where people could not see it. One night, after she had started eating better, I measured out a little more feed than Owen had instructed. It seemed cruel to give so little to something that had been denied so much. I was pouring it into her bucket when Owen stepped into the barn. Maren, he said gently, stop. I froze. He took the scoop from my hand, not harshly, just firmly, and poured the extra back into the bin. Then he explained it again. A starved body had to learn safety slowly. Too much, too fast could undo everything. I stood there with my hand on the feed bin, embarrassed by the sting behind my eyes. I had spent my whole life starving at a full table. I knew what it was to want someone to make up for years in one grand gesture. But Juniper did not need a grand gesture. She needed consistency. Morning, noon, evening, the right amount. The same voice, the same hand. Again and again, so did I. The first real boarding client came in September. Della Price drove up in a red pickup, with a retired barrel horse named Cricket, and a check already written for the first month. Della owned a tack shop outside town, had silver in her braid, and spoke like every sentence had been tested for nonsense before it left her mouth. She walked the stalls, inspected the water, watched me handle Cricket, and nodded once. People around here trust work more than promises, she said. Keep doing what you are doing. She paid on time. Then she told 2 friends. That small check did not save the ranch, not by itself, but it changed the air in the kitchen. It made the calculator less cruel. It made Silas stand a little straighter when he looked out at the barn. Mom called a few times that fall. She never asked how the ranch was. She never asked if I was eating, or sleeping, or lonely. She asked if I had calmed down yet. She told me Briar and Aaron had called off the engagement because Briar felt trapped. She said my sister was devastated, and some people were not built to handle disappointment. I waited for the old reflex, the guilt, the urge to fix what I had not broken. It came, but weaker. I told her I was sorry Briar was hurting. I did not offer money. I did not offer to drive back. I did not offer my birthday as proof that I could still be useful. After I hung up, Silas found me sitting on the back steps with my phone in my hand. You do not have to hate them, he said. I looked at him. Then what do I do? He settled beside me slowly, his knees cracking. You watch what they do when you stop being useful. The first time Juniper stepped toward me on her own, winter was close enough to sharpen the air. I had gone into the barn after dinner to check water buckets. She heard my boots and came to the stall door, slow and cautious but willing. No rope, no feed in my hand. No reason except that I had kept showing up. I sank down, right there, in the straw, and cried without making a sound. Not because I was broken, because something in front of me had been left behind, and it was still learning to trust the world one careful step at a time. A few days later, Della's red truck rolled out of the driveway after she paid the second month of board early. Juniper stood at her stall door, watching me instead of hiding. Silas sat on the porch with his coffee, the old gloves resting on the rail beside him. For the first time in my life, effort and reward were moving in the same direction. Chapter 3. The family chat they forgot could be screenshot. It did not happen all at once, and that was what made it feel real. The ranch did not transform because of one good month or one generous client. It changed in slow, ordinary ways. A fence stayed upright through a storm. A horse gained weight. A boarder renewed for another month. The stopped smelling like wet rot after we replaced the worst corner of the roof with patched metal and more hope than skill. I learned to read feed charts, track supplements, call the farrier before a hoof problem became an emergency, and answer the phone at 4 a.m. when a boarding client whispered, "I think my horse is colicking." 14 months after I arrived at Whitaker Hill, I could no longer pretend I was just staying for a while. I knew which gate stuck after rain. I knew which old gelding would bite if you tightened the girth too fast. I knew how much hay we burned through in a cold week, and how long a check could sit on the kitchen counter before it had to become feed, diesel, or a vet bill. The ranch was not rich, not even close, but it was alive. That was when Mom called about Briar. I was in the tack room, writing down a worming schedule, when my phone lit up with her name. I let it ring twice before answering, which was more control than I used to have. "Hi, Mom." Her voice came soft and careful, the way it always did when she wanted something. "Maren, I hate to bother you, but your sister is in a hard spot." I closed my eyes. What kind of hard spot? Briar is behind on her car payment, and her apartment deposit came due at the worst possible time. It is only $1,850. She is embarrassed to ask. That number landed like a bill someone had slid under my door. $1,850 was feed, farrier work, part of the barn roof, emergency savings for a horse that might go down in the night. Mom kept going. "You are doing better now, aren't you?" I looked around the tack room, at the cracked concrete floor, the second-hand saddles, the old desk Silas had pulled from someone's shed. Better. That was how she described anything I had not lost yet. "I'm not sending money." The silence on the line was not surprise, it was punishment. "Maren, no, Mom, I'm not sending money." She exhaled slowly. "You have changed." For a second, the old guilt rose in me. Then I looked through the open tack room door and saw Juniper in the near paddock, her coat finally beginning to shine. Her head lowered over a pile of hay she had learned would still be there if she looked away. "No," I said. "I just stopped paying for things I did not break." Mom hung up before she had to answer that. After that, I worked harder, but not the way I had in the beginning. I did not work to prove I could survive being ignored. I worked because the ranch answered honestly. If I fixed a latch, the gate closed. If I showed up every morning, the horses learned my steps. If I kept clean records, I could see where the money went. Della sent 2 more boarders my way. By the next spring, 8 stalls were full. Not fancy full. No polished brass nameplates, no heated indoor arena, no rich women in white breeches sipping coffee by the rail. Just steady people with older horses who needed care more than show. They paid on time. They noticed when stalls were clean. They told other people the barn roof still needed more than patches, and winter had made that clear. So I drove into town and sat across from Caleb Dorsey at First Commonwealth Bank, with a folder full of contracts, income notes, farrier schedules, and a business plan I had rewritten 6 times at Silas's kitchen table. Caleb was polite, which was worse than rude. He flipped through the papers, tapped one page with his pen, and said, "You have heart, Miss Vale, but banks do not lend on heart." I drove home furious and embarrassed. Silas found me at the kitchen table later, staring at the folder like it had personally betrayed me. He said no, I muttered. Silas poured coffee, then make the numbers harder to refuse. So I did. I cleaned up every contract. I made boarding terms clearer. I asked Della if she would write a reference, and she handed me 2 pages the next morning, written in blue ink with no wasted praise. Owen helped me outline basic care standards, so clients knew we were not just a field with a fence. 6 months later, I went back to Caleb with fuller stalls, better records, and proof that Whitaker Hill was not a dream I was hiding inside. It was a business. This time, he approved a small loan. We replaced the worst part of the barn roof before the next hard rain. The covered arena came later, modest and practical, not pretty, but enough to keep lessons and rehab work going through bad weather. Ray leased us extra pasture for the rescue horses. A widow, 2 properties, over signed a long-term lease for land she could not maintain anymore. Eventually, when the numbers stopped trembling under my hand, I bought 60 acres that touched our west fence. By 2025, Whitaker Hill operated across 188 acres of owned and leased land. But in those years, it still felt like every acre had to be earned twice. In 2022, Tessa Rowe walked up the gravel drive with a backpack, muddy sneakers, and the same sentence I had once carried like a shield. "I can handle it," she said. She was 17, all sharp elbows and tired eyes, asking for after-school work. She did not tell me much about home, and I did not push. I gave her small jobs first. Water buckets, sweeping aisles, holding horses for the farrier. She did everything too fast, like rest was something she had to apologize for. One afternoon, I found her trying to lift a feed bag nearly as heavy as she was. "Put it down, Tessa. I've got it. I know you want to. Put it down anyway." Her face flushed. I said I can handle it. I heard my own voice in hers, and it almost hurt. "I believe you," I said. "But around here, we do not make people bleed just to prove they belong." She put the bag down. That was when I knew Celeste had not gotten the final word in me. The screenshot came in late November. I was in the office, checking invoices, when my cousin Nora Pike texted. Nora was 37, a freelance bookkeeper, with a dry sense of humor and a talent for being underestimated at family events. Her message was short: "You are not in this group. You need to see it." Then the screenshots loaded. The group chat was called Vale Family Planning. My mother had written, "When Daddy finally stops being stubborn, Whitaker Hill could bring real money now. Maren has made the place look valuable again." Briar had replied, "She had her fun playing rancher. She can keep a couple horses if she behaves." My father had written, "Let's not upset Silas until papers are handled." I read that line 3 times. Not, "Let's make sure Maren is okay." Not, "She has been caring for him and the land." Not, "Maybe she has earned a say." Just papers. Then another message from Mom. "The sale could stabilize Briar, clear some debts, and give your father room to retire properly. It is time this family benefited from that land." I do not remember standing up. I only remember walking across the yard with my phone in my hand, while the cold wind cut through my jacket. Silas was in the barn, checking a latch. He had already checked, twice because his hands needed something to do. I handed him the phone. He read slowly. His face did not change much, but something in his eyes sank. "She has been ashamed of this place since she was 16, he said at last. I waited. "Your mother hated the mud, hated the smell of the barn, hated that people in town knew we worked with our hands. When she married Graham and moved to Lexington, she started talking like she had been rescued from something." He looked out toward the pasture, where Juniper stood with her winter coat thickening against the cold. "Now she wants to cash out on what she spent her life looking down on." I felt sick, not because I was surprised, but because some small part of me had still hoped there was a line they would not cross. Silas handed the phone back. "If I leave this place to you in a will, your mother will turn my funeral into a courtroom."
Grandpa?
"No, listen to me. She will say you influenced me. She will say I was old. She will say you kept me from the family. I know my daughter. A week later, he took me to meet Harriet Klein. Harriet was 66, with silver hair pinned at the back of her head, and glasses she wore low on her nose, when she wanted someone to stop wasting time. She had been Silas's estate attorney for more than 20 years. Her office smelled like paper, coffee, and old wood polish. She listened. She read the screenshots. Then she looked at me. A will can be challenged in probate, she said. A properly executed deed, recorded while the grantor is alive and competent, is much harder to unwind. Silas sat beside me, one hand wrapped around the head of his cane. I want it done while I know what I am signing. Harriet nodded. Then we do it clean. Notary, 2 witnesses, capacity letter from your doctor, property tax records updated, insurance updated, no shortcuts. I stared at Silas. You want to give me the ranch? He turned to me, tired but steady. I am not giving it to you because you are hurt. I am giving it to you because you stayed. The deed was signed in 2022 and recorded with the Powell County Clerk's office. The papers were legal, witnessed, notarized, and boring in the way powerful documents often are. Harriet made sure every line was clean. Property taxes shifted, liability insurance changed, boarding contracts were updated, risk waivers were rewritten. I learned the part of ownership nobody puts in inspirational stories: the bills, the responsibility, the knowledge that if something broke, it broke on my watch. Silas told me not to tell Celeste. Not because we are hiding, he said, because greedy people speak plainest when they think nobody can stop them. So I kept working. Near sunset, one evening, Mom called again. Her voice had gone sweet. I heard the ranch looks nice now. I watched Tessa lead Juniper slowly around the covered arena, patient step after patient step. It is getting there. Has your grandfather updated his will? I did not blink. You would have to ask Grandpa. Mom gave a little laugh, thin and sharp. Do not get too attached to things that belong to the family. After I hung up, I went into the tack room, opened the safe, and looked at the certified copy Harriet had given me. My name was there. Maren Vale. Recorded. Legal real. For the first time in my life, if my family decided to change the rules in the middle of the game, I had the rules in writing. Chapter 4, the deed they never checked. Owning the ranch on paper did not make Silas any younger. For a while he tried to hide that from me. He still came out to the porch every morning, with coffee in one hand and a weather opinion in the other. He still corrected the way Tessa wrapped lead ropes. He still leaned over stall doors and talked to Juniper, like she was an old neighbor who owed him gossip. But by 2024, his steps had changed. He moved slower across the yard. He stopped halfway between the house and barn to pretend he was looking at the fence line. His hand shook when he poured coffee. Some mornings, I found the porch light still burning after sunrise because he had forgotten to turn it off the night before. Lena Calder noticed before he admitted anything. She had been a nurse for 30 years before retiring, and she had the kind of quiet eyes that could read pain through a closed door. She started coming by with soup, pill organizers, and reasons that sounded casual. Ray made too much chili, she said one afternoon, setting a container on the counter. Silas looked at the pot and grunted. Ray has never made too much food in his life. Lena smiled. Then eat it before he comes to his senses. Owen came more often too. At first, he came for the horses. Then he came for the horses, and happened to check whether Silas had eaten. He never made Silas feel like a patient. That mattered. Silas would have thrown a doctor off the porch, but he tolerated a vet who knew how to speak to stubborn animals. I cut back on new boarding inquiries that fall. Tessa took over more morning chores. Della helped when a horse needed holding. Ray fixed a gate without sending a bill. Nobody made a speech about it. They just stepped closer. That was what my family never understood. Help did not have to arrive like a debt collector. The news reached my mother anyway. Celeste called first. But when I did not give her enough answers, she drove out from Lexington with Graham and Briar in the back seat of her concern. They arrived on a bright, cold afternoon. the kind that made every repaired fence line and painted board look sharper than it had any right to look. I saw them before they saw me. Mom stepped out of the car and looked at the covered arena first. Not the house, not the porch, not her father's window, the arena. Briar got out next, sunglasses on though the sky was pale. She looked at the trucks, the trailer, the Whitaker Hill logo on the office door. Graham stood by the car, hands in his jacket pockets, staring at the new fence like it had asked him a question he did not want to answer. Only then did Mum say, "How is Daddy?" I wiped my hands on my jeans. "He is inside." She had brought a casserole in a ceramic dish with a lid. The kind she liked to carry into church potlucks because it made her look useful. As we walked toward the house, she mentioned Pastor Elaine Brooks was praying for Silas. "I told her this has been such a heavy season for the family," Mom said. "She knows you ran off years ago, but I explained that things are complicated." I stopped on the porch. "You told Pastor Elaine I ran off?" Mom turned, face smooth. "Maren, let's not get defensive. People ask questions when a daughter disappears from family life. I did not disappear. I came here. That is one way to put it." There it was, the version she had built in Lexington. Celeste, the devoted daughter. Celeste, the worried mother. Maren, the difficult one who left and made everyone else explain her absence. Inside, Silas sat at the kitchen table with his coffee untouched. Briar rushed to him first, all soft voice and perfume. "Grandpa, you look so tired." Silas looked at her hand, covering his. "I am 81. That is not a scandal." Briar blinked, unsure whether to be offended. Mom sat down and began circling the real subject before the casserole cooled. "Have you thought about simplifying things, Daddy?" Silas lifted his eyes. "Simplifying what?" "This place, the land, the upkeep. It is a lot for one man. Maren runs it." Mom smiled tightly. "Of course, she helps." Silas set his mug down. "No, she runs it." The room went still. It was the first time I had seen my mother forced to swallow praise meant for me. Her fingers tightened around her napkin, but Pastor Elaine was not there to impress, and Silas was still her father, so she swallowed it. Briar recovered first. She sighed and leaned back like the conversation had hurt her physically. "My lease is up soon," she said. "Everything is so expensive now, and my anxiety has been awful." Mom turned towards Silas, her voice lowering into that practiced tenderness. "She just needs stability." Briar squeezed Silas's hand. "I do not want anything. I just want to know I will be remembered." Silas looked at her for a long moment. Being remembered and being paid are not the same thing. Briar pulled her hand back. Later, Graham found me in the barn fixing a latch that Tessa had already told me was sticking. He stood behind me for a while, saying nothing, which was his natural language. "This place looks different," he finally said. "It is different." He nodded. "You did a lot." I turned the screwdriver slowly. "Did you know they were planning to sell it?" His face changed, just enough. "Maren, did you know?" He looked toward the house, though Mom was nowhere near us. "Your mother worries about everyone." "No, Dad. She worries about Briar. Everyone else is a resource." His mouth opened, then closed. For 1 second, I saw the father I had wanted when I was 25. The man who might finally say he had seen it all and had been wrong to stay quiet. Then he looked down at his shoes. After they left, Mom started calling more. She wanted to know if Silas had an attorney. She wanted to know where he kept paperwork. She asked who handled medical decisions, whether the ranch bank account was still in his name, whether I was overwhelmed. Harriet told me to keep every voicemail and answer only what needed answering. "Do not argue with people who are building a story," Harriet said over the phone. "Let them leave you the draft." So I saved everything. Silas knew. Of course he knew. One evening near the fence line, he held the old gloves in his lap while Juniper grazed nearby. "I thought once that leaving this place to Celeste would be fair," he said. "She is my daughter." I stayed quiet. But fair is not handing land to someone ashamed of it. Fair is giving it to the person who stayed when it was leaking, limping, and worth more in sweat than money. He looked at the barn, then at me. "You fixed fence, you paid taxes, you wrote contracts. You saved horses I would not have had the strength to save. This land knows who stayed. He died in February of 2025, in his sleep, with the window cracked open and the horses calling before dawn. Grief did not arrive like I expected. It was not a scream. It was his mug still sitting by the sink, his coat hanging behind the kitchen door, the porch chair turned slightly toward the pasture. The gloves resting on the tack room table, as if he had just set them down for a minute. The funeral was held at a small church near Powell County. Mom expected a quiet service. She got half the county. Della came. Ray and Lena came. Owen stood beside me without touching my arm until I reached for his. Tessa cried in the back pew and tried to hide it. Caleb Dorsey came from the bank. Boarders came. Ranchers came. The feed store owner came. Pastor Elaine came too, and I watched her listen as one person after another told stories my mother did not know. Silas pulling a truck out of mud. Silas trimming a horse for free, because the owner had lost a job. Celeste. Silas leaving hay at someone's gate during an ice storm. Silas saying Maren had brought Whitaker Hill back. By the end of the service, Pastor Elaine was looking at my mother differently. Mom noticed. That made her more dangerous. After the burial, while people were still carrying food into the fellowship hall, she pulled me aside near the church steps. We need to handle the property before emotions make everything messy. What property? Her smile thinned. Do not play dumb, Maren. Whitaker Hill. I looked at Graham. He looked away. Mom continued. I spoke with Monica Greer. She handles rural land. She is coming Saturday to give a preliminary valuation. Nothing formal yet, of course. The estate paperwork is being handled. My grandfather had been in the ground less than an hour. I said, Saturday morning. 11. Mom's shoulders relaxed because she thought that was surrender. All week, she left voicemails. She said the ranch could be worth over $2 million now with the covered arena and boarding income. She said I might be allowed to stay a few months after a sale. She said I could keep a couple of horses at a family rate if I cooperated. Harriet saved every recording. On Friday night, I stood in the barn with Juniper breathing softly in her stall. Tessa came in carrying the gloves. Are you scared? She asked. I took them from her. Yes. She waited. But not enough to hand them my life. The gloves were still old, still cracked, still patched at the palm. When I slid them on, they fit better than they had that first morning. Maybe my hands had changed. Maybe I had. At 11 on Saturday, dust rose beyond the front gate. Mom's car came first. Monica Greer's followed behind it. I stood on the porch beside Harriet Klein, watching them drive toward the house, and I knew my mother had not come to remember Silas. She had come to sell what she had never stayed to hold. Chapter 5. The day. They tried to sell what was mine. By the time they reached the porch, the memorial lunch was already set out. It was not a party. It was coffee in old mugs, lemonade sweating in glass pitchers, sandwiches on paper plates, and a few photographs of Silas laid across the long table. His work hat sat near the corner, beside the old gloves he had worn for more years than I had been alive. Della stood close enough to touch my elbow if I needed her. Owen stayed a step behind me, steady and quiet. Moved between the table and the kitchen, with a pitcher of water, trying to look busy because standing still would have made her cry. Ray and Lena were talking with Pastor Elaine near the porch rail. I could see Pastor Elaine watching everything, with a careful expression. She had heard my mother's version of me for years. The difficult daughter. The one who ran off. The one who left family responsibilities for everyone else. But that morning, she was standing on the land I had worked, surrounded by people who knew exactly who had stayed. Mom got out of the car, dressed like she was attending a meeting, not a memorial. Navy blazer, cream blouse, low heels that sank slightly into the gravel. Graham followed her, pale and tense. Briar wore oversized sunglasses and held her phone like she might need an audience at any moment. Monica Greer stepped out of the second car, with a clipboard and evaluation folder pressed to her chest. She was professional, but I saw the hesitation in her face when she realized this was not a private family meeting. Mom smiled too brightly. She's here to help us understand what Daddy's land is worth. I did not answer. Not yet. That was the hardest part, letting her speak. Letting her build the steed she would fall from. After a few minutes of accepting condolences like applause, Mom tapped a spoon lightly against a glass. Conversation faded. She stepped to the center of the porch, one hand resting against her chest. Daddy was a stubborn man, she said. We all know that. He loved this place, but family also has to be practical. My hands were still. My heart was not. She looked around at the barn, the arena, the people who had come to remember him. Whitaker Hill is too much for one woman. Maren has helped beautifully, and no one is taking that away from her. But now the adults in the family have to make responsible decisions. I felt Della shift beside me. Mom kept going. A sale could help everyone heal. It could give Briar some stability. It could let Graham and me breathe, a little after everything this family has carried. And Maren could finally have a normal life again. A normal life. She meant an apartment in Lexington, a job at a feed store, and holidays where I sat quietly while Briar's crises took up every inch of the room. She meant a life small enough for her to approve of. Mom turned toward Monica. Of course, we would make sure Maren is taken care of. Maybe she could keep a few personal horses. And if the buyer is reasonable, perhaps stay a few months while she decides what comes next. Monica opened her folder, then stopped. Her eyes moved from Mom to me, then to Harriet. That was when I spoke. Mom, did Monica tell you she could list land you don't own? Mom gave a short laugh. Maren, do not be dramatic. No, I said. This is exactly the time to be accurate. Harriet Klein stepped forward. Her silver hair was pinned neatly back, and she held a folder so plain it almost looked harmless. I am Harriet Klein. I represented Silas Whitaker for 24 years. I do not represent Celeste Vale, Briar Vale, or Graham Vale. I am here because Silas completed his estate planning while he was alive, competent, and fully informed. Mom's face changed. Harriet removed a certified copy from the folder. In 2022, Silas Whitaker transferred ownership of Whitaker Hill Ranch to Maren Vale. The deed was recorded with the Powell County Clerk's office. The signing was notarized, witnessed by two unrelated parties, and supported by a capacity letter from his physician. Property taxes and liability insurance were updated after the transfer. The porch had gone so quiet I could hear Juniper breathing near the fence. Harriet continued. Whitaker Hill is not part of Silas Whitaker's estate. Celeste has no authority to sell it. Briar has no share to claim. Graham has no decision-making authority over this property. Monica closed her folder. She turned to my mother, her voice controlled. Mrs. Vale, you told me this was a preliminary valuation for estate property your family had authority to discuss. I was not told there was a recorded transfer. Mom's cheeks flushed red beneath her makeup. She manipulated him, she snapped. My father was old, he was sick. Maren isolated him out here, and got him to sign away everything. Harriet did not raise her voice. Silas scheduled the appointment himself. The deed was signed in 2022, not on his deathbed. His physician documented capacity. The witnesses were not family members. The transfer was recorded, taxes were updated, and insurance was updated. There is no ambiguity in the record. Mom turned sharply toward Graham. Say something. For 1 second, my father looked at me like he might. He stepped half a step forward, and I saw the old ache rise in me, foolish and automatic. Maybe this time. Maybe finally. Then Mom said his name again, sharper. Graham stopped. Maybe we should talk privately, he said, and there he was. The same man from my 25th birthday, close enough to see the truth, too afraid to stand beside it. Briar pressed one hand to her chest. I think I'm going to pass out. Mom spun toward me. Look what you are doing to your sister. But this was not my mother's kitchen. This was my porch. Della pulled out her phone calmly. Do you need me to call 911? Briar? Owen stepped forward. If you are fainting, you should be evaluated. Tessa stood beside me and did not move to fetch water. Briar looked around, waiting for the old pattern to happen, waiting for everyone to rush toward her, to turn my pain into her emergency. No one did. Her breathing slowed. Mom saw it too, and something desperate crossed her face. Family does not do this to family. I looked at her, and for once, I did not feel the need to make my voice gentle. Family showed up when I graduated. Family came to my birthday. Family did not build a group chat to sell the roof over my head before my grandfather was in the ground. Family does not call me strong just so they can leave me alone. Pastor Elaine looked at Mom then, really looked, not at the church version, not at the casserole version. At the woman standing on a dead man's porch, trying to sell land she had never worked. Mom saw that look, and it hurt her more than my words. "I will get an attorney," she said. Harriet nodded. "You are entitled to speak with counsel. But if you continue presenting yourself to realtors, buyers, or third parties as having authority over this property, future communications will be handled as misrepresentation. No shouting, no police, no dramatic arrest, just paper, witnesses, and the truth. I want you to leave," I said. Monica turned to me first. I apologize, Miss Vale. I should have verified more before coming out." Then she walked to her car and left without looking back. Graham lingered. "Your mother was trying to keep the family together." "No, Dad. She was trying to sell the only place that ever kept me." He had no answer. Briar took off her sunglasses. "You're going to regret being alone." I looked behind me. Tessa, Della, Owen, Ray, Lena, Pastor Elaine. People who had brought food, fixed gates, held horses, sat through grief, and never once asked me to disappear, so someone else could feel important. "I'm not alone," I said. "That is the part you never checked either." I walked them to the gate myself. Mom got into the car with her chin high, still pretending she had not been exposed. Briar slammed her door and immediately lifted her phone, probably already searching for someone who would believe her version. Graham sat behind the wheel and looked at me through the windshield. His mouth moved once, like he might say, he was sorry. He did not. I opened the gate, let them drive through, and closed it behind them. My hands were shaking by then. Owen did not ask if I was okay. He just stood beside me. Tessa came up quietly and handed me Silas's gloves. I slid them on. The leather was cracked, patched, imperfect, and warm from her hands. I had thought victory would feel like revenge. It felt like breathing. Celeste did send a letter later, through an attorney in Lexington, threatening to challenge the deed for undue influence. Harriet answered with the recorded deed, the physician's capacity letter, the witness statements, the tax records, and the insurance updates. No lawsuit was ever filed. Briar called once 6 months later. No apology. Just a careful little voice asking if I could help a little with her apartment situation. I said no. Graham sent a birthday card that year. It said, "Hope you're well." No apology, no explanation. I did not burn it. I did not keep it close either. I put it in a drawer and let it become paper. By spring, Whitaker Hill had 37 horses, 18 full stalls, and 16 names waiting for openings. Tessa had her first training client of her own. Della still told me the truth whether I asked for it or not. Ray and Lena came over without knocking. Pastor Elaine visited sometimes and quietly supported the rescue program, without ever bringing up my mother. Juniper had a filly that April. I named her Willow. Someone offered good money for her before she was 3 weeks old, and I said no. Not everything valuable has to be sold. Owen and I married beside the riding arena with mud on the hems of my dress and horses, watching over the fence. There were no empty chairs for people who had spent years not showing up. Silas's hat rested on the rail. His gloves hung in the tack room, where I could see them from the aisle. I still hurt sometimes. I will not pretend closing a gate erases the child who waited for her mother to choose her. But pain no longer holds the keys to my life. Blood gives people a last name. Showing up makes them family. And when my next birthday came, I did not wait for anyone to keep a table for me. I had built an entire place where I belonged. If you have ever been called the strong one in your family, I want to know what you think. Was I right to close that gate for good? Or would you have given Graham one more chance after all those years of silence? Leave your thoughts below. And if this story stayed with you, Stay with this channel for more stories about family, betrayal, boundaries, and the quiet kind of justice people never see coming. That evening, I turned off the barn lights, touched Silas's gloves where they hung beside the tack room door, and stepped into the yard. Juniper and Willow stood together in the fading light. No car came back up the drive. No one called my name from the gate. There was only the soft breathing of horses, a fence line standing straight, and a gate that finally knew who to keep out and who to let in.